Welcome to what is our second meeting, jointly organized with the German Ministry of Economics and Climate Policy to prepare the different sessions, the work stream on trade in the G7 presidency. And the purpose of our events is to debate, collect views from the ground, from civil society, business, parliaments, and so give the German G7 presidency a solid basis to go into those meetings. And so we have a very distinguished circle of experts from all walks of trade, I could say today. First of all, of course, we will Dominik Schnichels from the ministry will introduce the subject. And after that, we'll have a little bit of analytical input from my colleague Marion Janssen, the trade director of the OECD. German business is presented here by the German, so Wolfgang Niedermark, who's member of the executive board of the Federation of German Industries. We have Axel Berger, he's a deputy director from the German Development Institute and an expert on sustainable supply chains. So we're talking resilient and sustainable supply chains today. And Bernd Lange represents, he's the Committee on International Trade in the European Parliament. So a very diverse group of experts. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. And without further ado, Dominik, I give you the word and you can give us an introduction from the perspective of the German presidency.
Thank you very much, Nicola, and thank you very much to all the panelists for attending and all the colleagues who are listening in and hopefully giving us very important and useful feedback. It is, I think, from our side, a great opportunity to exchange and building on the input from the B7, Wolfgang, and also from T7, Mr. Berger. And the insights from the European Parliament represented by Bernd Lange. I think we'll have a very fruitful exchange today. This webinar is really intended to give us the input from civil society, business, and academia for the upcoming discussions on this important topic in the next weeks. I think I would like to start, which is not really a surprise, with a few words about Russia, and I think it has also a direct link to our topic. We are now more than 2 months into Russia's unprovoked and unjustified war. And we as G7 have all condemned the blatant violation of international law. At the same time, I think G7 has proven its important role and use as a forum to discuss between like-minded countries and also to come to quick reactions. I think we have shown unity and also our capacity to act, and I think we can be all very proud of that. I think our sanctions have already caused a very significant impact on the Russian economy. And the suspension of the most favored nations clause for Russia offers further room for future measures. The IMF predicts that Russia's economy will shrink about 8.5% this year. And the war has also, of course, implications for the global economy. For Germany, for example, we have lowered the growth expectations from 3.6 to 2.2%. this year, and inflation has reached 7.4% in April of this year, and is expected to reach about 6% this year. I think largely caused by increase of energy prices. I think also we have just come out of the COVID crisis, which I think was another very important factor, which showed us the vulnerability of our supply chains. The global supply chains and the long-established trade flows have been disrupted, and import and export bans have been imposed. Also, of course, in the follow-up to the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And this has led to bottlenecks in the supply of critical goods and commodities. And I think all of this brings me now to the topic of today. In our upcoming session, we will discuss with you how trade can be a driver for resilience and sustainability, particularly with a view to supply chains. As you know, this is one of our of the three key priorities that we have for the G7 trade track in this year. The topic is very popular in G7. It is also discussed in different formats, of course, in the labor and environment track. They discuss particularly the human rights and environmental due diligence issues, but of course also in the agricultural track, which discusses inter alia the issue of deforestation. In the trade track, we would like to focus particularly on two aspects, and I would like to add one last aspect, a third aspect, which is, I think, a result of the Russian crisis. The first question that really we would like to discuss with you is how can trade foster the resilience of supply chains? Obviously, secure supply chains are primarily a responsibility for business. So I'm very interested to hear what Wolfgang Niedermark will say to that. The companies have to do risk assessment. They have to ensure that they have logistics. They have to ensure that they have reliable suppliers. But I think, I believe that a proactive trade agenda is essential to reduce the risks of the supply chain disruptions. In the long run, we have to take appropriate measures to strengthen the resilience of our supply chains and ensure that the supply chains are maintained even during crisis time, especially in critical sectors. What are the key questions and issues from our perspective? Diversification of inputs and raw materials, reducing dependencies also in fossil fuels. I think I'm just referring here again to Russia. And stabilizing the rules-based trade exchanges. These are really important elements, I think, of the first discussion. The second point focuses on the trade's role for the global green transformation. Here we would like to address the question how trade policy can contribute to sustainable supply chains and which contribution G7 can provide to this end. I think G7 should be at the forefront discussing how trade-related climate and environmental measures and policies can best contribute to climate and environmental goals while being consistent with WTO rules. I'm also very interested to hear your proposals and suggestions on the role of the greening in trade. And a third aspect that I would like to add is what can and should trade do to support the security of the food supply. Many countries depend on grain supplies from Ukraine, and I would be very interested to hear from you how Germany and G7 should position themselves in MC12, where the food crisis will certainly play one of the very important topics, what can be done. With this, I would like to give back to Nicola or directly to Marion, who will introduce the topic from the OECD perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And yes, Marion, you've heard it, and you know, of course, you're working in real time on it. So these are truly disruptive times for trade. And at the same time, a lot of expectations that trade can help to solve societal problems like climate change. So we are very curious to hear the thoughts and data and analysis that you brought us today to enrich our discussion.
Thank you, Nicola, and very pleased to be here with you. Unfortunately, only virtually today in my home country, Germany, and to discuss, to present some of our work on around the theme of sustainable and resilient supply chains. Some of you know that I've only been working for less than 2 years at the OECD. I've been for many years at the before at the WTO, working for the multilateral trading system, and therefore a bit biased when it comes to believing in the rules-based trading system. I think we have maybe in the past years been starting to doubt and question why is the rules-based trading system not contributing better to sustainability of trade, to sustainability of supply chains? What can we do to improve it? But what we always knew is that the multilateral trading system was creating a predictability that was crucial and key for business and was crucial and key for supply chains, and in order for them to be able to act across borders. Now, unfortunately, I'm speaking to you today at a moment where we are still struggling with the sustainability challenge, and we are discussing it today, but we are also in a moment where we have, to a large extent, lost predictability. The rules-based trading system is still there, struggling, but after COVID-19 and now the Russian aggression against Ukraine, the uncertainties are abound and are huge, and uncertainties are bad for business. So I would like to start with what would be also my concluding words. It is very important in whatever we do to ensure that the rules-based international trading systems continues to function. And I think that was one of the points also made by Mr. Schnichels. I would like to use a few slides now to start with the theme that Mr. Schnichels ended with, but to say a few words about what the Ukraine crisis has been doing to supply chains. And if we go to the first slide with a chart, next slide, please. Here, you see some of our latest numbers around the Russian aggression and how against Ukraine. And that term is the term that we officially use at the OECD, Russian aggression against Ukraine, when we refer to this conflict. These are numbers, but they have actually a very geopolitical meaning. What you will hear in the public debate right now is very often a reference to the fact that Ukraine and Russia export, for instance, 30% of wheat. They are responsible for 30% of global exports of wheat. So the whole discussion around what happens if Russia and Ukraine don't export anymore is a discussion around what happens when the two of them don't export anymore. Yet we take the stance here to say, we have to look at these two countries in a different way. Ukraine right now has a problem to produce and to export. It's a war zone. Russia instead can produce and can still export. It often threatens not to export. And this threat in itself is one of the aspects, one of the factors that has probably been affecting wheat prices. It affects wheat prices, it creates uncertainty. Uncertainty makes policymakers nervous and can trigger snowball effects, like other countries saying, oh, if wheat is going to be a problem, let's stop exporting. They impose export restriction, and this is already happening. More export restrictions, even higher wheat prices. So we want, with this kind of analysis, to signal, please, analysts, please, policymakers, let's deal with Ukraine and Russia differently. Ukraine is responsible for 5% of global wheat production, only 5%. Russia is responsible for 10%. Russia can produce, and any threat by Russia not to export anymore is a threat against the countries that are net importers of Russian wheat, and those are notably in Northern Africa and in the Middle East. So here, cereals markets, agricultural markets, but a reflection of a complex situation that is going on, not only in terms of production, export, supply chain disruptions, but we are dealing with a number of markets where these markets are playing a role in geopolitical dynamics. Next slide, please. Here I'm going back to more general production data. So this is industrial data, and go back to the supply chain question, where we are. I present here some of the analysis we are doing in order to, as an attempt to try to understand how much are our supply chains exposed to acting in Ukraine, or here more in Russia, because our supply chains are now supposed not to interact with Russia anymore. And here we see that we have many affiliates established having activities in Russia. Those affiliates have business activities that feed into some type of supply chain, and many of these business activities in Russia have now stopped because of our sanctions. We see the United States very exposed, normal, because they have many multinationals, but also Germany. Also not entirely surprising when you think of supply chains, how to function. Those of us who have been working on this issue for some time, we were used to refer to factory United States, factory Germany, factory China, to make a reference to the importance of these three countries in global supply chains. Next slide, please. So those businesses will be affected, and they have to readjust their business operations, and that's something that is costly for business. So potentially big impact on individual businesses. When you look, however, at how important Russia is in the overall trade, it's not huge. Here we see in the value added of a typical supply chain, what is the role of Russia? And here we see for the country like the United States that has a lot of foreign affiliate activity in Russia. Nevertheless, its exposure to value added produced in Russia is only 0.2%. That's low. So if you look at these numbers of how much Russia is there, doesn't look like a lot, but those companies that have to change operations, as you saw in the first slide, that's costly. And now next slide, please. Even though the value added is not huge, some of the inputs, some of the elements in those value chains are simply key to make the supply chain function. So if those 0.2% disappear, it's only 0.2%, but the other 90.9, 99.8% won't work anymore. And that's the case, unfortunately, in particular with Russia, because Russia is responsible, an exporter of so many raw materials. Here an example of nickel. Russia is an important exporter of nickel. In business, also policymakers are struggling now how to understand how can we diversify, that's a word that came before, away from Russia. And one of the big problems that there is that some of these things you cannot just start producing. This is not like producing masks in COVID-19, where the global supply chains could react within a few weeks. Nickel is not something you pull out of the ground within a few weeks. This requires investments. One of the things we are supporting our members with is providing them with information where raw materials could potentially come from. That's the first step. Many other steps have to follow in order to diversify the supply chains. I will leave it here regarding my slides. Maybe we could close this to say a few more words on sustainability. The German G7 presidency has to deal with this important challenge that immediate resilience is on everybody's mind. But as I mentioned at the beginning of my intervention, the sustainability challenge has not been solved. Yes, we see an increasing number of regional trade agreements making reference to sustainability. Yes, we are seeing important negotiations at the WTO under TASTI, for instance, on sustainability. And yes, very importantly, we are also seeing a lot of private initiatives, for instance, in the context of guidelines for responsible business conduct. The G7 presidency has a challenge. It also has an opportunity because you're dealing with 7 countries, 7 economies that are like-minded, that jointly adhere to a number of important international standards in the field of environmental sustainability or social sustainability. And you have also very active debate on the role of private sector standards, for instance, in the context of responsible business conduct, that can play a role here. At the OECD, we have been active in all this field. We are working in a Tri-Directorate closely with the colleagues responsible for the guidelines for responsible business conduct, and we look forward to continue doing so and to continue working with the G7 presidency on these challenging issues, and hopefully in a way that reinstalls trust, a bit of certainty, and that continues to strengthen the rules-based international trading system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marion. A really good basis for our discussions. And perhaps, so this has been, is really a trade week here in Berlin. So everybody is preparing for the next meetings of the G7 presidency on resilient and sustainable supply chains. So it was another meeting where the B7 collected views from business yesterday. And Wolfgang Niedermark, perhaps it's after we've seen that, well, in some ways you could, well, in some ways you could think Russia is not so important in the global economy, but then if you really look at it, at the details, at some key inputs, also the presence of German business in Russia, and then very importantly, wheat, so food security, there's a lot to worry about when we think about the resilience of supply chains. So, and this, and then together with the pandemic that has also been truly disruptive and is not over when we look at China at the moment, how does business rethink the issue of resilient supply chains? So is this the end of globalization as we know it, just in time and the most efficient supplier? And then perhaps you could also start reflecting upon this. Is there mainly a tension between more resilient and diversified supply chains and sustainable supply chains? Or are there also some opportunities to bring the two goals, concepts together?
Wow, so many questions in one, and many answers already in these questions. Yes, you're right. We learn it now the second time the hard way, how vulnerable we are in our very sophisticated supply chains. We have been building up and enjoying, by the way, very successfully building up these sophisticated supply chains that nobody was really aware how sophisticated they are. So it's not only the consumer, but also businesses who get used to it, that everything is available just in time at acceptable costs, because we have established a system which was based on perhaps not a perfect, but a rule-based international trading order, which we were constantly improving, but was working relatively well, and is now disrupted by many factors. The first is a pandemic, like we have seen. Nobody could have foreseen that. Now a war, which is, I don't know, nobody has really foreseen that, but there were some people telling us there is a certain risk behind it. And now we have to accept that these risks we have always seen become reality. We learn it the hard way. And I hope that Mrs. Janssen is not being asked next year to explain how, which would be the effects of a China crisis. Then it would be really, really more complicated. But that's what's happening now in our community, that we think beyond these crises. The Russia-Ukraine crisis is really a shock. Everybody knows about the energy situation, which is a special case. And there have been many, many political mistakes. We now see that there have been mistakes. But there is another thing next to energy, it's raw material. So you have seen the slide by Mrs. Janssen, how strong our tier 1, tier 2, and so forth supply chains with Russia are, but mainly on raw material and processed raw materials, perhaps. It's less on intermediate products and of course not final products. But it would be if there's something happening with China. And I'm always coming back to China. Nobody will will say that there is no risk seen, that it's not only a rule-based system and a global international order. There must be a political will to cooperate. And there are many, many doubts that what will happen with China. Are they still willing to cooperate with us? That is the most important question. And that's what we are talking now. I would admit everything is painful. It is connected to a high cost, but we can manage the crisis so far with our supply chains with Russia. It would be really even more complicated and threatening if something happens with China, and that is the key issue we have on the table next to the everyday management of what's happening with Russia. I have to admit that for your second part of the question, the food supply, that might be a different case where we need to find joint solutions, including China, including other actors. We know that China is also very active on these markets. That might be another case next to health sector and climate protection where global cooperation is really needed. But I don't see that yet. Obviously, the pain is not strong enough yet.
Yeah, thank you very much for this introduction of the views, the direction of the business world. And Bernd Lange, so you're working on these difficult issues and have to react every day in the European Parliament. So it would be interesting to hear your views. So what's the role of policies, of politics in this reaction to the disruptions that we are seeing now, but perhaps also the potential future disruptions that Wolfgang Niedermark just addressed? Do you adjust your thinking and your strategies completely in some ways? It would be interesting to hear a view from the European trade perspective.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question, and also a huge question. But nevertheless, I will try to answer. I'm convinced that we have some lesson learned based on the COVID crisis, but also regarding the Russian war to the Ukraine. It seems to me clear that the principle looking for supply chain on the low cost goal and the lowest cost goal is not the principle we should look in future for. We have to be clear on the resilience of supply chain, the question why supply chains are created in a specific way, and also regarding the sustainability of supply chain. And this is, I think, a switch in trade policy also in the European Union. We are discussing now with the American friends in the Trade and Technology Council to establish a rapid alert system for supply chain, so that we can analyze quite quickly if there is a problem in the supply chain. So that was, I guess, a lesson from the COVID crisis, that now we should better know where is what produced, which capacity are there, what would happen if one of the most important items will really fall out, so that we can react in a proper way. I'm not sure that reshoring or refriend shoring the perspective will be, because we have a lot of investment in other countries, specifically outside from Russia, and the figures make quite clear that Russia is an atypical industrial country with mainly export. Before the war, 60% of the export were raw materials, specifically fossil fuels. But this is not the example we are faced with other countries. So we need, I guess, to stabilize global supply chain in our interest, but also in the interest of our trading partners, specifically also in the developing world. We want not to have a de-investment. So making supply chain more resilient, which shuts in rapid alert system and also some crisis reaction mechanism to stabilize the supply chain. That is one principle. Secondly, I guess we have to analyze a little bit under which conditions supply chains are created. There are different situations. So we're discussing now, for example, the question of semiconductors and the problem in the supply of semiconductors. This is not a classic problem of the supply chain. This is also a question regarding the research environment, the innovation of countries, their industrial policy. On semiconductor, we have on the 10 biggest companies worldwide, some from South Korea, some from Taiwan, and from the United States. None of the top 10 is coming from Europe. This has a different reason, and we should not mix different problems in supply chain. We should really analyze which problem is related to which supply chain. And thirdly, yes, we should really look to the sustainability of supply chain. And therefore, we are proposing a European due diligence legislation, which should be risk-based so that we can analyze where labor standards, where environmental standards are under threat, and to develop a strategy to minimize these problems, which will also lead to a more transparent view of the supply chain for companies. I have several examples of companies which were really surprised about the detailed picture of suppliers after such a risk-based analysis. And I think we can also link the first item to the third item so that in this risk-based test for supply chain, we can also integrate the, let's say, resilience test as well, so that this due diligence legislation will be having also an additional effect for stabilizing supply chain.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I just realized that I put too many questions in one each time. I have to be more selective. But in principle, a little follow-up questions, because what you basically argued for is that we need more data and analysis, a risk alert system for supply chains where they may become threatened in some ways. Well, you talked about semiconductors, innovation, etc. But there again, it's perhaps a question of analysis to understand why somebody else did. So the production and the innovation is located somewhere else. And then also the analysis along supply chains where you see human rights risk or environmental risk. And last time we were here together, we discussed the role of the WTO, and there were some panelists who argued that the WTO should have a much bigger role in creating this analysis, collecting data, doing this analysis. Is this feasible or desirable, in particular for the, let's say, what you said, the rapid alert system that's being built with the US? Do you need somebody, can you only unite countries that are sort of like-minded together to do this analysis, or this something for the entire international community that we should all work together on?
Of course, this would be the ideal vision, so that in the frame of WTO, such a system would be possible. And this would, of course, avoid the risk Mario mentioned also regarding the export restrictions, which were a short-term reaction on some problems with the supply chain. But we have to be realistic. At the moment, I guess we have the G7, and it would be a big step if in this G7 we could establish such a system and closer view on the resilience of supply chain. And of course, we have to look to other big trading partners as well. I guess it's also the interest of China to look on that, because we have a dependency on both sides. Also, China is depending on supply and investment from Europe. Around about 20% of the GDP are produced by foreign companies. 20% of tax income is coming from European companies. So there's also a dependency. So I guess there's also an interest in stabilizing supply chain, specifically after the problems with COVID. We have now a delay in shipping, an average from 1 week, in really an increasing frame. In the WTO at the moment, I guess everybody is knowing that really progress is not a fast-going train. So we're trying to stabilize the WTO. We are perhaps having some deliverables at MC12 in June on trade and health, on fishery subsidies. So it's really a slow process, but clearly our European ambition is that we should modernize the rulebook of the multilateral system to stabilize the rule-based trading system, but it's a hard work.
Thank you very much. Axel Berger, you are so, I mean, there are many aspects we touched upon, didn't really discuss, that are related, of course, to sustainable supply chain. And I think this is your expertise. But if you want to, so one aspect that Marion brought up, which is really urgent, Dominic did too, is the looming food crisis that we're looking at. And of course, here the response is urgent. It needs to be addressed, but could also have tensions with sustainability, because you could think about things that are being discussed, is that you convert land that has not been used for agriculture in other countries to fill the gap. So how do you see this in the context of this goal to achieve sustainability in trade? Is that something we really shouldn't be worrying now because it's such a crisis that is looming, or how do you look at that problem?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I'm not a food trade expert, so I guess others will chip in to contribute to this discussion. But obviously, there's a certain tension in this area. Obviously, for example, to in the short term, to ensure that many developing countries do not suffer too much from this war on Ukrainian soil and the sanctions against Russia. Marion mentioned the countries that are most affected by these effects. These are Northern African countries, other African countries as well, and there are of course certain things you can do short term to try to limit the damage. I think it's about limiting the damage because the problem is quite severe. It's about avoiding export restrictions. That's obviously one thing. Also shifting production to some extent. Yeah, so we produce on soil. We produce quite or we use many of the soil we have to produce energy for energy production. This could be transformed in the short term or the medium term for food supplies. This is obviously quite critical. We should also think about not only about food, we should also think about fertilizers. So what kind of restrictions do we have with regard to fertilizers, which are necessary to produce food? I think that's another a key area. And but all of this and all of the short-term solutions we find often have the tendency to become a long-term mechanism. So we should already now not forget about to think about sustainability and to try to produce food in a way that it's sustainable for local communities, but also obviously for, if you think about the global value chain perspective. These are my thoughts, very general thoughts, but I would be happy if others could come in on this important topic.
Sure. And we come, Marion, perhaps that's in part a question for you. You already made a strong plea to not restrict exports, for example, but apart from not doing things that would be wrong, I'm sure you're thinking about some solutions already now, and perhaps you can even reflect on what they would mean for sustainable food production, which you are also looking into in a longer term perspective, of course, with your work.
Yeah, we're looking at an immediate situation that is quite complex. So there are actually multiple immediates. There is the immediate where, in our view, we are currently in a situation where there is no lack of food in global markets, because the last harvests were already largely in the markets. But the crisis situation and the uncertainty it has generated on top of earlier uncertainties, and then maybe also a bit the communication that has focused on the 30% number, export number, have led to an overshooting of prices in some markets that has immediate effects on some of these countries that are net importers of wheat. So that's an immediate issue. We have prices that went at some stage probably above the equilibrium price, the new equilibrium price. Wheat went up 65%. It's now back to 25% of the before crisis price. So we have this immediate issue, price fluctuation. Then we have the potentially in autumn a situation where the new harvests that should be on the market may not be coming to the market. That is because Ukraine may not have produced. Ukraine is still producing, but Ukraine has logistical challenges to get whatever it has out of the country. Now, those logistics, how to get tractors into the country in order to harvest, how to get the grain out of the country via rail rather than via the Black Sea, this is not something you can easily fix within a few weeks. Now, other countries have harvest excesses. So there have been countries, I think Australia had a very good harvest, but the logistics chains are not set up for export from Australia to Northern Africa. These things can change, but that's something that doesn't necessarily happen in the beginning. Then we have the after. Next year, what happens? Now, some of the price signals that we are seeing now will lead farmers across the globe to produce differently, and therefore, and to some extent, to bring the markets back to equilibrium. So we already see farmers in certain European countries considering to plant sunflowers because they know there is a lack of sunflower oil. So at some stage, this will stabilize again. But for the discussion on food security, the some stage is too far away. The immediate problem exists. Now, what can we do for this longer run? It is important, and this is an area we have been working on for quite some time at the OECD when it comes to support to the agricultural sector, where our OECD countries have a tradition of providing a lot of support. One of the things that we are seeing in a report, notably that we will soon publish on the monitoring and evaluation of agricultural support, is that in our member countries, support to agriculture has been increasing through these crisis situations, but it's increasing not in the type of support that would steer agriculture towards more environmentally friendly production, but rather into the kind of support that further distorts markets. So that would be a plea for policymakers. Think about how you support in the times of crisis, and that's maybe the opportunity. Yes, that support is needed, but design it in a way that doesn't only take the immediate resilience crisis into account, but also the immediate, but also longer term challenge of environmental sustainability.
So a plea to bring resilience and sustainability together from the very beginning. Wolfgang Nieder, so we are at the food, well, we looked at the food crisis now, and but Marion talked about logistics and how important that is. And I wanted to ask you, since you're a China expert, you already said, you know, it's important that China cooperates. At the moment, there's this China zero COVID strategy does create quite some disruption, but perhaps you have more insights into that. So how important, significant is that as an immediate additional threat to world trade and to the proper functioning of supply chains? And is there a way to react to it, or is it a bit like what Marion has been describing, that it's something where you cannot make up for in the shorter term?
Yeah, of course, this COVID and zero COVID policy gives us a flavor what happens if the supply chains with China are interrupted. I've been talking about this risk before, and we learn a lot from that. And as I said before, I don't want to think about political issues, which might be manifold more important compared to the zero COVID thing. And this zero COVID thing is a trap China is sitting in due to its inflexibility to react to mistakes. I think that it was a mistake what China has tried to do with the zero COVID policy, and now we see the effects. It's like a tsunami. It happens far away, and the wave hitting you is coming later, and we are still waiting for that. We know what's going on in China, how many ports are affected, how many logistic chains are affected, and also production lines. We do not have the full picture, but we are afraid that this will harm a lot of our production lines here as well. But that's not the key issue. I think we can overcome. Also, China will this summer somehow cope with this issue, and I hope they manage, but not in a perfect way, but manage in a way what they can do in order to minimize the problems. I want to come back to this question on tensions to sustainability, between resilience and sustainability. So first task is to diversify our supply chains, and it will be a long-term process with many new behaviors and strategies coming up. And then the other task is to apply all kind of sustainability mechanisms, because we have understood that, of course, we need sustainability in our international trade relations. So it's not that industries in Europe and in Germany in particular are now saying, oh, wow, now we are under stress and let's forget about sustainability. It's exactly now the time to be even more sensitive on this issue. I think our companies have understood. Everyone wants to have sustainable supply chains, clean supply chains without problems in environmental issues or human rights or social standards issues. I think there are a lot of drivers for our companies to understand that. They have understood it. And that's perhaps a certain contradiction to what Bernd Lange just said, that we need more regulation and bureaucracy in order to make us behave more sustainable. My confidence is high that the European companies are driven by these thoughts anyway. We can discuss about strategies, but the commitment for sustainability, for environmental protection, for climate protection, for human rights issues is at its highest time now. I've never seen so many companies talking about it, acting in that direction and having understood what the requirements are.
Thanks. And Dominic, you raised your hand, and there were so many different things you wanted to react, perhaps.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nicola. Really a very rich debate already. As this is for us the input into the G7 discussions that we will have soon, I would like to be a little bit selfish and ask some more additional questions to get some answers or input. First of all, I noted that I think we have defined the sustainability question primarily so far from a security of supply perspective. Wolfgang has at the very end, I think, also introduced very much sort of the sustainability in the sense of environmental protection, etc. So I would be very much interested in getting more input also on this second aspect and what exactly needs to be done. And when I'm at this point already, Wolfgang, I think mentioned that he sees a very high commitment of the companies to ensure the protection of human rights and also sort of the protection of the environment. And I think the question that is looming behind the bush here is, okay, if industry and trade is doing that already, should then policymakers step back and say this is enough, we leave it to the companies, or should we worry about the ones, the black sheep that are maybe not so much like Wolfgang would like them to be as well? And do we need to act in order to ensure a level playing field, that everybody respects the same rules and not just the companies which are good take the required action? So that would be, I think, the first sort of first set of questions. The second, I think where I would be really interested in is how does business actually adjust to the risks of supply security that they see at the moment? Do they engage in new strategies such as nearshoring, or do they actually start engaging in diversifying supply sources? And just that we know what are the strategies that companies are taking to react to these new challenges. And then obviously, because we are policymakers, we are not business ourselves. Neither Bernd nor Marion, we are the ones who maybe set the rules, but we are not in the business ourselves. What do you expect from the policymakers? How can we help you in achieving sort of the strategies that have been applied? I think that would be, in my view, very important. And I couldn't agree more with Bernd's comment that more analysis is needed. But at some point in time, I'm sure the citizens will expect from us more than analysis. They also expect action. And I think that is why I'm very much sort of trying to get answers to the question, what kind of action are you expecting from us? And then sort of a third block is, I think, about what Marion has said. We should see the crisis as an opportunity. And we should try to bring the things together. And I think when it comes to energy, the energy sector, I think we're very much trying to do that. We see that we have a strong dependency on one external supplier in fossil fuels, and I think we all know who that is. And we are trying to grab this opportunity and say, okay, now is the moment to invest into renewable energies, because that helps us to reduce the dependency on fossil fuels and one external supplier. We are doing much more in Germany, but that's. Are there any other areas where you see that we can combine sort of the crisis with sort of solutions that really brings us further into sustainability in terms of protection of the environment, protection of climate, etc., etc. Do you see other opportunities on which we should focus as policymakers? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think now it's my task to distribute these questions among you. But very fair point, of course, about the real sustainability of environmental sustainability. And perhaps Axel Berger, that's a question to you. One, what are the opportunities that trade can provide there? But then, of course, also the question about whether we need a binding standard there. There are non-binding standards like the OECD M&E guidelines for various things, including also environment, but they're continuously being developed with different stakeholders. But of course, Bernd Lange and the EU have already given the answer in some ways to Dominic's question. Do we need a law, something that is binding, or will business do it by itself? What's your view on this important question?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I think the reality already answered some provided an answer to your question. I mean, we have a number of due diligence laws in many countries, and my point would be we will have to closely analyze their effects. And I'd like to add to the complexity a little bit by emphasizing that that we should pay very close attention to the effects of these due diligence laws on developing countries, on poorer communities, on more vulnerable communities. Because one effect that could happen is that if companies are forced to be more sustainable or would like to be more sustainable, either way, they will need to rely on suppliers that are coming from more safer places, that have better regulations, that provide more transparency, all those things that are important for companies in order to prove that they are sustainable. And so this has effects. This has effects on poorer, more vulnerable communities, because they may face certain barriers to access global value chains, which they need in order to develop. So there's an important trade-off there. I'm not arguing, I'm absolutely not arguing that sustainability is a bad idea. It's a very necessary idea. But I would encourage policymakers, but also corporate decision makers, to think about the secondary effects, which need to be monitored, which need to be taken into account in order to ensure that our understanding of sustainability is not only environmental sustainability, but also social sustainability and economic opportunities are also important. So having this holistic view is, I think it's very important when you think about these either voluntary standards for sustainability or due diligence laws. So I think we need to take into account this complexity. So this would be my main point on this point. And I would also argue that research needs to dig a little bit deeper in order to analyze the effects of these mechanisms and laws.
Thank you very much, Bernd Lange. Perhaps also for you, this question. So the EU is preparing legislation, of course, on sustainable supply chains. So why do you think it's necessary? What do you think it can achieve? And perhaps you also have an answer on how, or at least some thoughts on how the G7 politics, the EU, can help business then to really comply what you're preparing to comply with it.
Yeah, of course, I'm convinced that we need a European legislation for getting a level playing field. If you're talking to French companies under the French law, seeing that other companies in Europe are not covered by a law in an internal market of the European Union, there is some competition disadvantages. So we need a European law that's crystal clear. Also looking to the supply chain. So a textile garment factory in Bangladesh is not just producing for France or for Germany, they are producing for a lot of companies based in the European Union. So there are a lot of arguments for European regulation. And yes, there are companies quite well advanced with a lot of sustainability responsibility in their supply chain. But unfortunately, and we have also some investigation made and some studies, some free riders are still there. And they have, of course, some competition advantages as well. And this is not acceptable. And clearly, we want not to have a bureaucrat monster, no doubt about. We have a small example, the so-called conflict minerals, based, by the way, also on the OECD guidelines from Marion, which makes clear how we are thinking responsible supply chain could be created and also proper monitored, also have the possibility to integrate voluntary industrial schemes so that this is really not a disadvantage for European companies. But of course, we are really discussing also with other countries. So we have a dialogue once again with the United States on that. They have the USMCA with Mexico, also a company-orientated legislation. And this aspect is a little bit new for them. And we discussed how we can really go for a more global approach. I guess this is really important. So the argument on this level playing field is also valid on the global scale in the competition with companies from other countries. And I'm also convinced that this legislation will really lead to an improvement in the partner countries, because it's not just ban of products from partner countries. We have always in mind to improve the situation on the ground. That's really an important. So this cut and go system is not our intention. We want to stabilize investment in partner countries and guarantee also proper workplaces there. That's really, I guess, quite crucial. On the standards, I guess we should really not look always through our European glasses. It's not a European lecture. That's also totally clear. We have some universal agreements, the 8 ILO core conventions, 12 roundabout UN environmental convention, and the Paris Climate Agreement, more or less agreed by all countries worldwide. And this has to be proper implemented. It's not the European way of life. This has to be always clear. Sometimes my impression is in the European behavior, there is a kind of lecture towards third countries, and this is not the right way to cooperate. And lastly, it's not only the burden of companies, to be honest, it's also a burden of proper rule-based agreement between countries. And therefore, I want to remind you that we are looking also to some bilateral trade agreements with a strong sustainability chapter. We are now negotiating with Mexico, with Chile, with Australia, New Zealand. So and have a cocoa initiative with Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. So it's always also necessary to establish proper elements of good governance in our partner countries in a fruitful dialogue so that both elements can really improve the situation for the people on the ground.
Thank you very much. And Wolfgang Niedermark, there were many questions to you also from Dominic, but also some from the audience, in fact, which I want to weave in. One was, of course, is how does it exactly work? How does business adjust by itself to these disruptions? So more the resilience question. But now we've already talked a lot about sustainability, environmental standards. We have questions from the audience. Marita Kochweser, she asked how, shouldn't we care more about deforestation-free supply chains because deforestation is truly dramatic. in Brazil. And that's also a nod to what was said before, that we all have to work together, including with emerging and developing countries. You said that business is dedicated to this sustainability goal, but of course there are also many demands. They are reacting to disruptions, making sure that we reach our Paris climate goals. So Dominic asked, what can the G7 do to help? What would help you bring all these challenges or react to all these challenges in a way that our economies and societies can still thrive?
Yeah, thank you, Nicola. A lot of questions. You are right. It's always difficult to bring them in the right order. First, I'm totally in agreement with Mr. Lange that, of course, we need a European law for reaching this goal, but we need a good one, not an oversized, overloaded law. And then it would be even better to have an international law. And that's part of the answer to the G7 process. Of course, we expect our governments in the G7 to broaden the scope, that even more countries, not only G7, are joining our club towards sustainability. In G7, it's a given. We are dedicated to these goals. And again, I'm a little bit old-fashioned perhaps, because I'm grateful to Axel Berger, who repeated that sustainability is not only ecological aspects and social, but also economical. So you have a scale with 3 bowls, and it's really complex to keep that in balance. And if you're not willing to compromise a little bit on each of that 3 bowls, you are not successful. So in order to be economically successful, you need to pay a certain ecological price. If you just say ecology is my only goal, then you cannot produce anything at all. You need raw materials, you will have emissions, you will have mobility, and all this has an ecological price. By the way, with social things, same. But same is true. You cannot be economically successful if you are not taking care on the 2 other aspects, social and environmental. It's understood. It's understood. People know that. Companies know that they have no future if they are not acting in a sustainable way. And yes, we need rules and regulations. Yes, we need it on European level. We need it best on international level. And here comes the problem. We have competitors in the autocratic world who have different concepts, for example, on human rights. And they even think they have the better concept of human rights. And we are in competition with them. And G7 task is to broaden our community, our camp, to cooperate with other countries. It's perhaps a good idea to take OECD membership as a basis. It's already a broad club, and then try to make progress on this group, 38 so far. Perhaps we can even get some more countries on board, and then we have a good club of like-minded, and then try with the power of this like-minded companies, G7 plus, to get into finding a way to cooperate with those countries who are even more important in some aspects, like China and Russia, in order to start cooperation. Very complex, very complex situation and task. And this is, to my perception, really disruptive times. The good old globalization model is breaking down. It's dying. The next model is not yet born. We are working on that. It will take a couple of years. And G7 is a good starting point. Who would have thought that G7 is again so strong and relevant? We all thought it's G20, but G20 is dysfunctional for the time being. I cannot imagine to sit together with Russian partners now in this situation to find solutions. So G7 is very important, and we are expecting the politicians to promote sustainability solutions. And Dominic, you are right. never miss a good crisis. It would be a great mistake to fall back to old habits and forget about climate protection at this stage. No, even more so. Now we have to accelerate our efforts into, for example, climate protection and hydrogen economy. And we are working on that. And I cannot give you a satisfying answer, what are the strategies of the companies, but I can tell you there are a lot. And the strategic department in each and every company is now, again, the most important, because the convenient time where everything is working automatically is over. And now the strategy people are asked to come up with new ideas in all kind of these problems we have been describing here. But this will be a huge diversity of strategies. No one gives simple answers at this stage. And depending on your business model, and that's perhaps my last thought, sorry for being so long, but we have no expectations for the time being in the reform process of WTO. I always say we have to reinvent WTO. It must be less multilateral for the time being. We must go for these joint initiative statements. We go for plurilateral solutions. Climate Club is perhaps the most prominent example. Let's try to find, for these many, many problems we have, climate, food production, all kind of huge tasks. Let's find a club of willing nations to define rules and regulations and referees, by the way, and processes of dispute resolution, and then club by club by club make progress in bi-regional or bilateral and plurilateral thing. Maybe that leads in the end to a new form of WTO, which would deserve this name again, and is maybe again multilateral in a couple of years. But now let's try the plurilateral concept. Climate Club is perhaps the most prominent one.
Thank you very much. And yeah, Marion, perhaps you can build on these thoughts a little bit. So first of all, Dominic was very upbeat on saying, well, there might be opportunities in the crisis we're seeing, for example, promoting renewables to have a more diversified energy portfolio, become independent of Russia. But are there other things that you see when you think about it, when you do your analysis, where we can, in these really disruptive and difficult times, think about creating a better trade system, more sustainable, more resilient? Are there other examples?
Well, first, I maybe would like to echo a bit some of the tone and the gravity behind the description of what Mr. Niedermark described. We had a similar discussion in the meeting of the OECD Trade Committee a few weeks ago, where there was this real sense of that what we have known in our generation as a system of globalization of international trade, and also of a set of institutions who govern that something has now been disrupted that is very severe, and that something needs to be reshaped. So there is a real sense of this is serious. And I also, but at the same time, I think that all of us, those of us sitting here, but also those of you listening, we cannot afford to be paralyzed by the size of this shock. We have to start reshaping immediately and with bold steps. At the same time, we have to accept that we will have to move stepwise, like has been mentioned before. Now, what would be ingredients of these steps? And I can assure you that we are thinking of this at a daily basis, also reassessing on everyday and sometimes changing priorities, strategically adjusting. We are not a business, but we are trying to help our members as we can. And this is not a business as a period where we are doing business as usual. First, coming back to a point that Axel made, the role of companies in standard setting and the use of private standard, there is already quite some evidence that this has beneficial impacts also in the developing world. And that's partly the case because the private sector tends to bear a part of the cost in order to make the suppliers fit into their supply chain. That's sometimes implicit, but that is something that has come out of the research. So there's interesting information around this already exists. So I do believe that this role of the private sector and the role of private standards, be they environmental sustainability, be they in the social sense, or the roles of responsible business conduct guidelines, is important. What, however, and I come back to Mr. Schmichet's question, what needs to be done? One of the things that needs to be done, and needs to be thought about, is how these rules fit with our trade rules. Because they fit, these two sets of rules are part of different legal systems. One is more in the commercial law, the other is in the trade law. We are seeing these things now getting closer together. And we have to think this through well, because if not, we end up with an incoherent set of rules, and then we end up with rules that make Mr. Niedermark's life and one of the companies of the BDE very difficult. So this is the moment to look into this deeply and rapidly. Important thing to be to analyze. Second, what can be done? Any support that is currently given as part of crisis support, and this is happening across the different parts of the economy, should, like I said, for the agriculture, be looked at through the lens of immediate crisis support and long-term sustainability objectives. And that sounds theoretically easy. In practice, this is going to be difficult. And you also, as policymakers, we have to be accept that we may make mistakes, because we do not for every policy know the exact environmental impact, for instance. But right now, if you err on the side of the risk, err in the side of more environmentally friendly in order to combine the short-term and the long-term goal. And third, what needs to be done, indeed, there is this question of which standards and with whom to work. I would fully agree with Mr. Lange, where there are international standards, multilateral ones like the ILO labor standards, use them. And where they do not exist, develop with those who speak your language, find consensus with those who are closest to you, and enlarge the circle to the extent possible. The G7 group is a first step where this can happen, and I would definitely want to provide the OECD as a platform as a next step. We consider ourselves an organization of like-minded countries, but we also have our differences. EU needs time to agree, then it was EU, US, Canada, Japan, Korea, and our members, but we are a club of countries that has many important values in common, and we stand ready to support any initiative and any operations in this direction.
Thank you, Marion. And I had from the beginning, from some time already, I had 2 hands raised. Axel Berger, perhaps you wanted to chip in and comment on things that were said before.
Exactly. Yeah, I'd like to pick up the discussion about the WTO. I would not argue that we need to reinvent the WTO. Plurilateral approaches have always been part of the game. Yeah? The WTO very much builds on plurilateral agreements. I could tell a couple of examples, you know them all. And we also see that that plurilateral approaches are also used very effectively, for example, on the issue of services, domestic regulations. The investment facilitation negotiations are pretty advanced, I think, e-commerce as well. So it's working. But now comes the but. Plurilateral approaches are often perceived as the game of the industrialized countries, and to some extent that's true. There's one exception, investment facilitation, which is driven by developing countries, which is quite interesting. So we need to make sure that plurilateral approaches are inclusive, and that's perhaps a suggestion to our G7 colleagues, that the capacities of developing countries to negotiate plurilateral agreements and to implement plurilateral agreements needs to be strengthened. So that would be my argument. Plurilateral agreements are useful, but developing countries need to be enabled to really participate in these negotiations.
So perhaps you can elaborate a little bit before I give the word to Bernd Lange, because that's a question I also had, since you focus a lot on development or cooperation. So of course, all the problems we talked about, climate change, etc., they are global. Often problems can happen in emerging countries like Brazil or developing countries that will need support to address those issues. So when you say developing countries will need support for these plurilateral agreements, is it in terms of governance or in terms of enabling them to basically comply with whatever has been decided in this agreement?
Yeah, it has many levels. I mean, first of all, developing countries, they have very little representations in Geneva, if at all. So the capacity to negotiate is key. That's very, very important. I think the virtual modes of negotiating have helped, so that experts from capital can actually participate. But it's actually also about implementation. So it's not, and often these plurilateral agreements that are currently negotiated are about rules, not tariffs. And you only benefit from the rules that you also be able to implement. Yeah? Only then you benefit from these agreements. And so it's also a matter of assessing where you stand, yeah, what the current situation is, perhaps what the barriers are to implement these reforms, and then obviously also to assess what kind of external support you need. So these are the things which need to be taken into account when we talk about inclusive plurilaterals.
Thank you. And Bernd Lange, you had thoughts to add, but I also wanted to ask you explicitly a bit more about this. Well, basically this plurilateral, multilateral governance we are in. So how does the EU think about, when addressing these problems, cooperating with others? Is it with other like-minded countries in a first step, and then you extend it? How do you help developing countries to implement whatever you need them to do? How do we need to think about multilateralism from a European perspective in these very challenging times?
Yeah, sometimes I feel I'm the last defender of the multilateral system. And I'm still believing that we should really bring all countries into the tent and give them the opportunity to raise their voice. And as Axel mentioned, the capacity for negotiation are really different between developing countries and industrialized countries like the G7. There we have to really offer support, and also regarding the implementation, the phase-in of the multilateral rule books. And we did it. So we have also the Aid for Trade. We have the conference on that quite soon. So this has to be strengthened as well. But the principle to keep them in the tent is in our interest, I guess. I'm totally convinced about that, specifically regarding the African countries. We want to stabilize their economic development, the well-being of the people there. And this is only possible if we have close trade links with Africa on a fair base. And therefore, I'm a little bit skeptical, and this was my intention, to switch on the warning lamp, that if we have this club building and some are really discussing, oh, let's only trade with like-minded countries and forget the West, this will really lead to a block building worldwide and keep the developing world outside. We have US, EU on the one side, Russia, China on the other side. I guess this is totally not in our interest. So therefore, I'm really careful regarding club ideas, like-minded countries ideas. Some voices I heard also forget WTO, just focus on OECD. This will not help. And looking to Africa, I guess we should really go in a direction of more partnership, more support of developing their possibilities. I heard a lot of saying from Africa, look, the G7 countries, they have a double standard regarding Ukraine. Now the refugees are in the social security systems, they can go to work. Refugees from other countries are not allowed in the same manner. In Yemen, 250,000 people were killed by Saudi Arabia, the big ally from the G7, and nothing is happening. So this question of double standard is really quite common in a lot of African countries, and we have to be careful that this not is leaning to focusing in a lot of African countries to a different trading partner. So my really small voice is keep them all in the tent, even knowing that with plurilateral discussion and, for example, the e-commerce discussion, I guess, is quite a good exercise. There are a lot of developing countries on board, US and China on board, trying to develop common standards on transparency, on AI, and so on, which is also a kind of bridging between developing countries and the G7, because with the e-commerce, with digital services, also African countries have a chance to compete with European companies, and we should really open the door for that. And last remark, yeah, let's really use this international standards and really focus on that. Some days ago, some weeks ago, without any really public awareness, China ratified ILO Convention 29 and 105 against forced labor, as we promised in our CAI in the investment agreement with China. We should now put the finger exactly on that and discuss this with China, having in mind they are in the tent, they have problems, but find a proper way of a dialogue and not trying to exclude them from a common global world, which need really more cooperation.
So a plea for true multilateralism. We are almost, so we have almost at the end. I wanted to give Dominik Schnichitz the opportunity to say whether we forgot something, but Wolfgang Niedermark wants to react, and please.
Just to clarify, I love the tent symbol. Let's have a tent where WTO is a name and then have different tables. In the moment, we are all in this tent, and the two biggest inhabitants or users of this tent are not moving. It's China and US, and let's make them move. And we have to change perhaps the setup that we are all not only at one table discussing everything with everyone same time, but let's open various tables under this roof of this tent. I like your picture. We are not that apart from that angle. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think with OECD, it's similar. It's a smaller club, but it starts negotiations there, and then it pushes it out. It throws a tent over everybody else. That's like
I would like to take Axel's word, inclusive. We are an inclusive tent. We have the inclusive framework on baseline erosion and profit shifting. Unfortunately, because of all these crises, there hasn't been time for the international community to celebrate that really unique and sophisticated tax agreement. China is a member. Most of the world is a member. We are currently discussing an inclusive framework for climate mitigation. Same thing. This is not meant to be closed. But as Wolfgang Niedermark said, it is important to find, get people around tables to start talking. We are ready to help to facilitate the conversation.
Very good. Dominic Schnichels, lots of inputs. Did we give you did the group give you the right inputs? Were the questions raised that you were interested in having answers to? There are more remarks I have to say from our audience, but it was so rich that it was difficult to bring everything in.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nicola. It was, I think, like you said, I think a very engaged discussion, and I think it was a very rich discussion with many, many different inputs. And I think we'll have to do some analysis after this meeting, what to do and how to introduce all of that usefully into the G7 process. If I may, at the very end, 4 comments. I think the first comment is, and I quote here Wolfgang, we are going through disruptive times, and many of the companies are sort of giving the task to their strategic departments to find answers, and there is not one common set of answers at the moment. And I think that means that the companies are going through difficult times, but of course also it is quite a challenge for the policymakers. Because I think we should very much try to help the companies to do their job properly. So I think the dialogue between the civil society, the business, and academia is very important, particularly in these disruptive times. And I would really like to thank you for the discussion today, but I think this really needs a continuation. The second point is when we come to answers. When it comes to sustainability, we said, okay, we have 2 dimensions: the security of supply and sort of the standards of environment, social, consumer protection, etc. When it comes to security of supply, I think one of the key topics many have mentioned is diversification. So I think that's definitely a topic we have to look at. When it comes to sustainability, I think the consensus was we need ideally a set of rules, and ideally international, and if that is not possible, plurilateral. Another sort of big topic, I think, from the discussions is what are the right tools to move forward? Should we defend, like Bernd, the multilateral approach? Or should we be open also to plurilateral approaches? Or should we all have a big party in the tent where everybody finds himself or herself? And I think that is a very important question to be answered. And last but not least, I think Marion said every crisis has many opportunities. So let's really use the opportunities that are presenting themselves. And I gave the example of we accelerate renewables now because we have an over-dependency on fossil fuels from Russia. So let's reduce that and let's immediately move to the right type of energy mix for the future, and that is the renewable energy mix. And I think we try in Germany, we try to go from currently between 30 and 40% to 80% renewables by 2030. So that's the current ambition. Let me really thank Nicola in particular for excellent sharing as always. Always with a smile on the face, but very much to the point. Giving us hard questions to answer, but I think you do it very elegantly, and many thanks for that. Many thanks also for all the questions that came in the chat. That we will certainly have a look at in the follow-up to this process. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you to the group and to our listeners who were also chipping in their questions. I certainly learned a lot today, and I wish you next week a very fruitful meeting on resilient and sustainable supply chains. We are very curious to see the results and how what we discussed today will perhaps be reflected a little bit in it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you very much. Bye.